Happy Tuesday, and thank you for joining us on the Be Empowered Network. This is Kimberly Robinson Alexander, and I'm excited because I am sitting with James Koppel. He is a visionary. He has a career that spans a lot of years. And I wrote some things down because I can only hit the highlights. If I talked about your resume, Jim, we would be here all night. But I do want to highlight that you have been for what almost 5 decades in the business of helping people. You're expert in public policy, strategic planning, training and facilitation, community coalition building. You are part of you were part of the President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. You help to implement those things. You design and implement comprehensive responses across all levels of government. And to boot, you'll pray for us.
Mhm. That's true.
So, welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. We're here today to talk about this monumental project that I'm growing more and more in love with as we move forward together, called the Freedom Fast. And before we move on and just have a conversation about the vision that you see, I want you to explain to our audience exactly what the Freedom Fast is.
Well, first of all, Kimberly, thanks for having me. It's great to be in this conversation with you. And I honor the work you've done and continue to do. And we look forward to partnering with you in a number of different areas. So appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you.
To understand what the Freedom Fast is or to define it, kind of need to understand a little bit of the history of my involvement with it.
Okay.
I'm academically trained as a historian and a church historian, especially. That was my focus, both in American religious history and in medieval church history, but more recently, American church history. And last spring, I was struck by the fact that we were approaching our 250th anniversary of the celebration of the Declaration of Independence, of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I been somewhat frustrated politically over a number of issues and concerns and was wondering what this 250th declaration was going to unfold or what it might reveal. And I started looking at the history behind the writing of the Declaration of Independence, and particularly the two Continental Congresses, which gave the Declaration its life. And I discovered that in the first two Continental Congresses, which created the Declaration, they called for days of fasting. Well, ironically, I was reading at the same time Isaiah 58 in the Old Testament, which really talks about, don't tell me about your fasting, which exploits people or that is more symbolic, but talk to me about a fast that sets the oppressed free, that feeds the hungry, provides housing for the poor, etc. It was more of a fast of action, and that it required both a pause, a reflection, and then service or some kind of action. And I began asking friends and colleagues, what would it be if we asked the nation, given how polarized we are as a country, if we paused, reflected, relate, and serve? And what would it be like if we called for a national fast? Also, in my research, I discovered fasting as as an act of civic engagement was not just in the Continental Congress. It has been a long time practice. It's part of the American DNA. And Lincoln called for 3 fasts and 4 days of Thanksgiving. And the language that was used even in the Continental Congress and all the way up through Lincoln was a day of fasting, prayer, and humiliation. And by humiliation, it was really looking at our need to both repent and to change our course given how we've treated people or the conflict that we're engaged in. And the reality was that as we looked at this, and in conversations with you, Kimberly, and several others, pointed out the fact that the Declaration of Independence was not for everybody.
Right.
It was not for slaves, it was not for Native Americans, and it wasn't for women. And part of the language of the Constitution and the thinking of the founders that we are becoming a more perfect union. And 250 years later, we certainly have made progress. Everything from the Emancipation Proclamation to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s. We've made progress, but we still have a ways to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been organizing this fast to really call people together in their families, in their communities, in their schools, in their places of worship, and to also accent the fact that as a country, we're a pluralistic society. I mean, there are efforts on the part of many people to make this a Christian nation or Christian nationalism. And the founding fathers were very much opposed to that. That's why they used language that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator. They didn't mention Jesus. They didn't mention God. They talked about our Creator, and that we are endowed with certain inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so there was this pushback. In fact, in the First Continental Congress, the first major debate that the Congress had was whether or not they were going to open the Congress with prayer. And they finally decided to do that. And then they employed a chaplain. It was an Anglican priest who became a chaplain of the Continental Congress. But Lincoln was also under significant pressure to identify a Christian faith or denomination as the source of who we are. And he refused to do that. And that battle between church and state has been a long-term battle. But what we're looking to do at the end of the day is to bring people together to reflect on the values that were found, the values of liberty, particularly, that were found in the Declaration of Independence, and begin to find ways in which we can have open and meaningful conversations without the polarization. To be sure, the Continental Congress itself, there was a lot of conflict and a lot of argument and debate over slavery, over what to do with the Native Americans, and on tribal lands, there over the economy, over the very relationship with England itself, whether or not we should revolt. But they figured out ways to have conversation and to come to agreement. 56 men gathered together in Philadelphia in Carpenter's Hall to really hammer this out over a 2-year period. So that's the origins of this. And by fasting, it's not just about fasting food, but it could be something of priority or of importance to you. It could be social media. You're going to fast social media. We're looking at 6 days of fasting, which began really on February 4th. We're looking at the 4th of every month, where people could begin to practice together acts of fasting, have conversations, and come together. We're holding meetings around the country at different locations. We've held one in Ogden, Utah, Harlem. We're going to do one in Oklahoma City and also in Indianapolis as well, and plus other communities. But people can choose their own fast. But at the end of the fast, we're asking them to think about how they can serve each other in that process.
And I do want to highlight that while many religions have fasting as a basic premise of that religion, that this is non-religious and religious. The Freedom Fast is about bringing all people together. So whether you claim a specific religious denomination or not, this is still open to you. This is about having healthy discourse. This is about having difficult conversations. You and I have had them together. You know, we are learning each other. We're learning each other's backgrounds and our differences. And right before we went live, I shared, I have learned a lot about the Declaration of Independence being part of this project, because, it wasn't written for me. It wasn't written with me as an ancestor of slaves in mind. How do you think we can jump that hurdle? How do you believe we get to the point where we understand where it came from, but the potential of where it can go?
It's a great question. It's one I've really been wrestling with recently as I've been writing and thinking about the role of faith communities. You are right to point out 16 of the world's major religions have fasting as part of their tradition or practice. But the fast that we're calling for and the fasting that was practiced in the colonial period was for everybody. It wasn't just for people of religious persuasion. You could have no particular religious orientation and still fast. But to your point, or to your question, I think the thing that I'm learning, as I've thought about this question, I remember watching, and this will show how old I am, the TV series Roots. And there is this great line in that series where one of the leading characters says to Chicken George, who is proposing to her, she says, "You ain't got no idea where you came from, therefore you ain't got no idea where you're going." And it was really an emphasis upon understanding our past. And what I have discovered, and particularly David Hatcher's book called African Founders, that it's an extensive, almost encyclopedic study of the slave trade and the fact that 26 million Africans were exported out of Africa and found their way to various countries. 12.5 million of those came to the New World, or to the Caribbean, or to what became the United States. And in the Middle Passage, 1.8 million of those died. 10.5 million survived. And as they came, the thing that many African leaders during the writing of the Declaration of Independence were slaves, but they respected the fact that the colonialists were seeking to be liberated or freed from England. And they became allies. I mean, I read a number of pieces of slaves who valued and appreciated Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Even though they resisted them of being their master, they respected their quest for freedom. And probably no group better than the slave community better understood the quest for freedom than slaves. Is that they understood what that battle was. And of course, they would be met with disappointment, because the fact is the Colonial Congress and the colonists in general didn't want to take up the issue of slavery. The battle was with England. They did not want to take on the battle of slavery. And probably had they taken it on, they probably would not have succeeded in their emancipation from England. And it was just that complex and that frustrating. And most of the African founders, or many of the African founders who had respect for what was going on, understood that position, but they had hope that the Congress, by the time they got to the Constitution, would address this issue. And of course, they failed to address it. And they gave up the debate on both Indian removal policy and slavery in order to achieve this other goal of being free from England. And that is what Joseph Ellis calls the great contradiction, is that at one level we're championing or celebrating the freedom from England, but on the other hand, we're oppressing and holding in slavery Africans and displacing Native Americans from their lands.
Right.
So that contradiction is real, and it played out in hard ways, and it also exposed the hypocrisy of this effort. It's one of the vulnerabilities when we think about what we're going to celebrate, is that one had to happen, but it happened at the cost to people who were desperately who were here not on their own volition or will. I mean, the colonists, many of them came here, most of them came here to escape religious persecution. And they then achieved their freedom, but then turned right around and continued to oppress and enslave people that were on their shores.
And I think that's the biggest struggle. That's the feedback that I get, right? We can look at century after century in this world, and we can look at the last 250 years in this country, and it will repeat itself in terms of living in a state of hypocrisy.
Yep.
But something you said is the reason why I'm part of this project, and it's the hope. Mm-hmm. It's the hope that in this country divided as it is right now, the common thread is we want better.
Yeah.
And it almost takes this level of divisiveness to get people to say, I'm an Afro-Latina and Jim Koppel is a white man, but we want the same things and we want to come together on that ground.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's critically important that we remember our history and we study our history. Mm-hmm. I mean, current efforts to silence our history is probably one of the more serious threats to our democracy. Mm-hmm. When we are not in a position to address the sins of our nation and who we were and and the struggle that we've made to become. And yet at the same time, there are people who have bled and died for this country and for what we stand for to achieve a greater good. If I could tell a personal story.
Sure.
My father was a decorated World War II veteran, mm-hmm. and he grew up in Missouri. And we actually, in our family lineage or history, who migrated from Kentucky to Midwest, we have an ancestor that was a slave owner. And after the 13th and 14th Amendments, he set his slaves free and actually gave them land. Mm-hmm. But my father was prejudiced. He was biased in so many ways. But on a trip that we made as children to Florida, driving from Kansas City to Florida, we drove through Mississippi. Our car broke down in Tupelo, Mississippi. And my dad and me, I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. Mm-hmm. He and I walked to the service station, leaving my brother and my mother in the car. And as we walked, we passed sharecroppers, people working in the fields. Mm-hmm. We got to a service station. And when we walked into the service station, we heard, and this was in like 1958. Mm-hmm. We hear in the service station, somebody yelled, "White man," and a path opened up, and my dad and I walked through it. We go to the man who was running the service station, and my dad gives me 25 cents to buy a drink out of a soda machine. Mm-hmm. I go to the soda machine, I pick up the drink, and there's this young, maybe 5 or 6 year old black boy standing next to me, looking at me drinking this. And I gave him my drink. And he took the drink, and the man who ran the service station yelled, "Boy, don't you give him that drink." And my dad looked at him, more than looked at him. My dad grabbed him, threw his face into the cash register. He said, "That's my boy, and he can give any boy he chooses a drink." And he threw me 3 more quarters, and I bought these African-American boys drinks. Mm-hmm. We walked out, and I said to my dad, I said, "What happened there?" Mm-hmm. He said, "All I'm going to tell you is that I fought in a war for your right to give anybody a drink and for anybody to take it. And I wasn't going to let that man take that away from you." And we walked back to the car, and my mother said, "How was it? And what did it cost?" He said, 75 cents. That was the price of justice. Now, that taught me an important lesson. I couldn't undo that experience, but it taught me while my dad would be by many standards considered prejudiced, he fought in a war alongside people that were fighting for the very tenets to preserve this democracy. And he never, throughout my adult life, as long as he lived, in the causes that I engaged in, the work I did in Africa and East Africa, my dad and my mother were extremely supportive of it. and they learned and gained an understanding and an appreciation. But that's part of the evolution of who we are as a people.
Mm-hmm.
And we must continue to be pulled into the future. That's my definition of hope, something that pulls you into the future
Mm-hmm.
and continues to celebrate the principles of the quest for liberty that we had in 1776. But that liberty has got to be for everybody, or it'll be for nobody.
Yeah.
To paraphrase Martin Luther King.
The thing that sticks out for me in that story is your dad did it out loud.
Yeah.
That's the part of it that sticks out for me. And I think one of the things that is always troublesome for me in conversations, and I have a lot of them, Jim, you know that,
Yeah.
is too many protests quietly.
Yeah.
Too many are outraged, but it never moves to action. Mm-hmm. You found the space that you wanted to live in a long time ago. You found what made you feel good. Why are you so action driven?
You know, a book was written recently called Moral Ambition by a Dutch historian, where he kind of analyzes different people who have driven change. And I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. I participated in protests and demonstrations. I've been arrested. The fact is that while those were important actions, and some of them actually had some impact at the time that we were doing them, right now, I'm not that confident in the power of demonstrations or in those kinds of actions as I am in just, we've got to get engaged where people live. And I'm concerned about the celebrations of the 250th anniversary. A lot of them are really for American academic elitists, and they don't really get translated into the neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And to the voices of people who live out that liberty and freedom and have expectations about how police behave, mm-hmm. about how banks do loans, how we get access to housing, all of those different things. And it just, I think my personal faith relationship is what drives me. And it's a sense of, I mean, my perception of God, I've often said to people, is what I called a gladiator view of Christianity. Because I came to my faith, I was the only one in my family. And at the age of 15, I thought Charlton Heston and Ben-Hur was the narrative. And so I would be fighting for my faith all the way along. And I could not see, I mean, in fact, just recently, I celebrated the 60th anniversary of the first time I ever preached at the age of 15. And no longer, I preached that sermon on February 7th, 1965. And 3 weeks later, I'm preaching in a rescue mission where homeless people had to show up and hear a sermon. And once they heard the sermon, they got a meal. And my goal was to keep them awake. But I immediately found myself involved with people who were suffering. And Matthew 25, one of my favorite passages of scripture, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. Mm-hmm. Or when I wasn't, it's the separation of the sheep and the goats. And so I cannot see an injustice and not speak into it, because in speaking into it, I'm speaking into it to my Jesus. Mm-hmm. And that's my personal faith. No one has to agree with that, with that personal faith, but that's what drives me. And that's what pulls me into the future, is that an obedience. The word obedience comes from the Latin word obedare, which is to hear with an impulse to act. And so to be obedient is to hear and then to act. And when I hear the voices of the hungry, our work in East Africa, working with gender-based violence and refugees in the Kakuma refugee camp, I hear their voices. And if I take my faith seriously, it will drive me to an impulse to act.
What do you think the legacy, what do you hope the legacy of the Freedom Fast will be?
That people will pause, they will reflect, they will seek out people and be confident. I mean, it was interesting to give a silly illustration. Uh, I'm a New England Patriots football fan. I have been for years, since I lived in Boston for so many years. But I also grew up in Seattle, or I graduated from high school in Seattle. And so for these two teams to play, and so the other night we went to a sports bar,
Mm.
and I walked in wearing my New England Patriots hat. And I actually said to Colleen, my partner and wife, I said, should I wear this hat? I don't know what kind of reaction it's going to get. And I actually was nervous. I don't want to have to live that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there used to be a time where you'd walk in and people would tease you or make comments, but you weren't threatened.
Right.
And we now live in these environments where the people, those kinds of reactions you have to take seriously. And I want us to de-escalate in our conversation, in our use of force and violence in all areas of life, and really pause and reflect and to listen and to engage. I have a very close friend in Schenectady, New York, who is a 3-time veteran, or he was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
3 different tours, retired as a colonel. And he did intelligence. He was combat wounded. He's a combat veteran. He and I don't agree on much of anything politically, but we are close friends. And every time I'm in upstate New York, which is quite frequently because of one of our projects, we're together as a family, sharing, talking, exchanging ideas. Is that why can't we all be that way? That we have so polarized and so made our politics our religion in a way that it has driven us to absolutes. And the reality is that my faith is based on my faith, not any absolute certainty. And I have to give room and tolerance for a wide range of people. That's why we're distributing with the Freedom Fast, Eboo Patel, who's the head of Interfaith America, his book in terms of pluralism, religious pluralism, that he's a Muslim leader, a Rhodes Scholar, worked in the Obama administration, that he has a right to express his faith, to believe in it, to express it, and to live it, just like I do. And I should do nothing to stop it.
It's interesting you brought up the story about wearing the cap to the sports bar. The other day I was leaving my home, and I have an 8-foot gate that goes across my home. I have a rather large dog that lives here. And I live in a neighborhood where you don't see police often. They don't come through. I kind of live in country suburbs of Houston. And as I was getting ready to pull out, 2 police cars came through, and they were trailing 2 young men who were on bicycles. And instinctually, where I would ordinarily leave the gate open and let whoever was letting the dogs out to close the gate, I got out my car and I closed it. And it's for all of the same reasons why you were concerned about wearing your hat, but it's exponential.
Yeah.
And I think my personal struggle when it comes to so much of this is, when will it change?
Right.
And so I participate with the Freedom Fast because I want to see a time where my children, my grandchildren, my great grandchildren don't have to get out the car and pull the gate closed.
Yeah.
Don't feel compelled to do those things.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the logistics, right? Because this is a monumental project. You know, every time we meet, we look at it and it's like, okay, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? And you, I know, are very accustomed to working on projects to this scale. But for me, I won't lie, sometimes it's a little bit like menacing. Like, okay, so there's a national project. How do we get it going? you know, how do we take it from this conversation to from a concept paper to really implementing it with meaning?
Great question. Well, I've done big projects. I can't say I've started or tried to initiate a big movement.
Okay.
and uh, and there probably isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't ask, "What am I doing?" and 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 the God that calls me to this kind of work, uh, I just feel this sense of keep going, keep going. And I'm learning from the people that we're interacting with. I mean, I've held focus groups, we've held several projects. I'm getting good feedback. I mean, I had a major organization say to me, "Well, we can't support the Freedom Fast because that's really a hunger strike." And I said, "A hunger strike?" No, it's not a hunger strike, but I get why you might think that, but
Mhm,
that's not what this is. And so we've actually had to put on our website what the fast is not,
mhm,
so that people would understand that this is about de-escalating in every way we can to develop understanding and to develop a passion to serve one another and to really set ablaze again the values that brought us to that quest for liberty in 1776, and
mhm,
now to make sure that that quest is for everybody,
mhm,
and that our and the fact is, Kimberly, over 250 years, our Constitution is the most replicated document in history. Countries all over the world use our Constitution as a model. Our values, in terms of we fought fascism and we won, and we defended the world from a global uh, exploitation. We we defeated or we developed the technology and tools under PEPFAR to address the HIV/AIDS crisis
mhm,
in Africa. Millions of dollars were spent on testing and immunization. We're a country that has a heart and compassion, and the fear is we're losing it. And
mhm,
we need to come together and recapture and reclaim those core values of becoming more perfect in this process.
mhm,
And operationally, we are kind of feeling our way along. People are
mhm,
now just beginning to sign up and saying that they will do something or engage in some kind of fast. And that begins to spread exponentially and it will multiply. And I don't know where it's going to end up in terms of numbers. I know that when I started Community Anti Drug Coalitions of America, I said to my staff the first week of our new project, I said, if people knew we existed, how many members do you think we would have? And they said, probably 200. And I said, that's what we're going to say. That's our step of faith. We have 200 members. Now let's go find them.
mhm,
And then we finally grew in 2 years to 4,000 members. And those were real members who signed up, paid dues, and engaged. We're not asking people to pay dues in this project, but we're asking people to sign up and register to say that they will pause,
mhm,
they will reflect and relate, and then report back to us what they've done.
mhm,
We've got guidebooks and work toolkits that will help guide people in things that they could do around the fast. And so we're making this as practical and as easy as possible. But to be a part of saying, I fast in order to achieve this goal or whatever that might be. And one of the lines that I feel it's really important is I choose to fast
mhm,
in order to heal my relationship with an addiction, with a relationship, a hardship that somebody may be facing. I choose to fast in order to heal whatever that relationship is. And if we can get people talking about that and then reflecting back on it, because at the end of this project, we'll probably be writing something. We'll be writing the story of this
mhm,
so that people can have some hope that out of the 250th, this wasn't just an event for the intellectual elite to look back and say, aren't we great? But it's something that the American people, black, white, brown, I don't care the color of your skin, the nature, or the origins of your faith, have said that this is a democracy and a principle that we should fight to preserve and to keep.
So you mentioned the HIV crisis, you mentioned addiction. And for lack of a better way of saying it, those causes are sexy, right? COVID was sexy.
Yeah.
Like those are the things that bring those academic elitists out. Those are the things that get your name in lights, so to speak. How do we make fasting sexy again?
Wow. That's an interesting question. I think what's interesting is that fasting has become part of our health system.
Yes.
I mean, intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm type 2 diabetic, and my doctors put me on intermittent fasting in
Mm-hmm.
order to prevent me from having to go on a lot of medications.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a pattern or a practice. But uh, make getting people to engage. What was interesting, I mean, when you stop and look at the HIV/AIDS crisis,
Mm-hmm.
it became sexy. It didn't start off that way. It was born in fear,
Mm-hmm.
and we became frightened of gay men, particularly gay white men, and then gay black men,
Mm-hmm.
and the death count was rising in such a way. I mean, it's estimated that our work in Africa, not our work, but our country's work
Mm-hmm.
in Africa has saved over 26 million lives because of PEPFAR
Mm-hmm.
and grassroots people. You know, I remember in Swaziland, now Eswatini, meeting with a religious leader of a denomination that did not want to believe or didn't believe that you should pass out condoms because there's going to be sexual promiscuity that would promote. And finally, this faith leader stood up and he said, "You have my permission to distribute condoms. And furthermore, I'm going to be tested regularly, and I insist that you be tested." And it changed the way people began to look at the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think today, if we can get people to simply think about the tone and the speech that we use in our conflicts, to pause and to reflect, and then to be intentional about something I'm prepared to sacrifice in order to achieve this greater good. And so, reintroducing the language of fasting,
Mm-hmm.
that it is cool to be able to say that I gave this up in order to achieve this greater good. And that even, you know, I said to my wife when we went into that sports bar wearing my New England Patriots hat, there was a couple that looked at us sitting at a table next to us. And I wish I had, and I thought about this afterwards, because they clearly were Seahawks fans. And they kind of smiled at me. And I wish I would have said something fun to them and to engage in a conversation about the game that wasn't polarizing. And it's the same thing, you know, I mean, I live in Utah and guns are a big deal here. And you can walk into a restaurant and people are carrying concealed weapons.
Jim, I live in Texas. I live in Houston.
Yeah. You know?
And at least in Utah, the cold keeps you inside. We're pretty much warm all year round. So guns are blazing all the time.
Exactly. I wish I could find ways to engage, or if I begin to think intentionally about engaging in constructive conversations, that I'm not asking everybody to agree on everything. I'm asking everybody to agree that we can have a conversation and that we can learn from each other and create an environment that's safe and that explores new ideas, and that I'm open to learning from those experiences. Because it was interesting in the Continental Congress, those 56 delegates, people came together. There were Baptists, Moravians, Anglicans. They came from all kinds of Methodists, different traditions, but they found a way to work together. And that's what I'm seeking.
Yeah. I think I was gonna say concern. It's not really a concern, it's a word. But I think about people who have conversations. You and I are from different backgrounds and we have conversations, right? And we can disagree in love and that be fine. Do you have any concerns around those who are not as practiced as we are about hearing opposition, um, and where that might go? How are we
Yeah,
facilitating these sit downs and these conversations?
I absolutely have that concern, and I'll tell you, I have hope around that. However, and in Ogden, Utah, 3 weeks after Charlie Kirk was
Mm,
assassinated here in Utah, we held a meeting in Ogden, Utah. It was called Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Civility.
mm,
And we had 50 people show up in a meeting. And many of the people that came to that meeting came anticipating conflict or
mhm,
an argument. And the process that we used in terms of how we bring people together, we use this thing called the Multerity Project,
mm,
where we create symbology and images and art so you can see yourself in those images. And I have to tell you, Kimberly, the most amazing thing at the end of that event, the testimonies of the people standing up and saying, I came here thinking it was going to be a fight, and
mhm,
I'm coming here loving everybody in the room. And that the tools and the process that was used to get people to talk to each other and to listen to each other. I mean, the 6 days of fasting, our first focus was on listening,
mhm,
is what it takes to really listen and to engage. And it was amazing to see how those folks listened and heard things that they had not seen before. We do these breaking bread events in Oklahoma City, and the first one that we did was actually on the first day that country shut down after the Oklahoma City Thunder beat or was scheduled to play the Utah Jazz, and the game was called off because of COVID. In
mhm,
that meeting, watching uh, uh, an elderly African American woman who was a civil rights activist in Oklahoma City sat across from a young white attorney.
mm,
And I walked by the table and heard their conversations. And after about a half hour, I came back by the table and they were holding hands, talking to each other.
mm.
And I heard him say, I never realized that.
Right,
And I went, this is the kind of thing I want to see happen across the country,
right.
is that we figure out a way to find that hand, to hold it, and to
Mhm.
say, I never realized that. And then
I
to
have to say, I'm 48 years old, and I grew up in Harlem, and when I was a teenager, the rule, the police were the rule, right? And until I moved out of this country to Costa Rica, I didn't realize how racist my environment was.
Mhm.
It was just normal to me. That was the normal environment. And growing up, I never expected that I would be sitting where I'm sitting now and having the conversations that I have. Um, but I regularly travel with an organization called Dedication to Community down to Florida and other places where we sit in a room. I'm a layperson, a representative of the community, a representative of the Black and Brown community, and I sit with police officers, sometimes from all across the country, and we get to know each other, and we have fun. And there's one that always calls me a spy, but I let him make it. Uh, but the point is that when I went to the first one of those gatherings, I didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
You know, when I walked in the room and saw the guns and the badges and the uniforms, my heart did beat a little faster because we are so caught up in difference, and we are so caught up in taking our sample set and assigning it to the population at large that we forget the individualism
Right.
of a community,
Yeah.
and we forget the individual contribution to the community.
That's that's why I think Brian Stevenson in his book Just Mercy, and he
Mhm,
was on the president's task force on 21st century policing. He talks about proximity,
mhm,
and I this was illustrated or pointed out to me nowhere more clearly than in a project we were doing in San Diego
mhm,
on human trafficking.
mhm,
And in our first meetings, the police were referring to the women as prostitutes, bitches, whores, using horrible names describing them.
mhm,
After they started working with them and listening to them, I literally noticed in like the fourth or fifth meeting,
mhm,
their language completely changed and they referred to them as survivors, as victims, and then survivors, and what it meant for them to be in close proximity,
mhm,
understanding the conditions under which they were living
mhm,
and what was driving into certain kinds of behavior, and both in terms of the pimps that were prostituting them to the poverty that was influencing their decisions and their complicity. It was amazing. It was a major cultural shift.
mhm,
And I think when we create these opportunities for law enforcement or other groups to be together and to
mhm,
hear their story, that's why, quite frankly, we facilitated in Minneapolis a major task force on police use of force. We did it a year before George Floyd.
mhm,
George Floyd, we released our report in March, and George Floyd happened in May. And the Attorney General and the Superintendent of Public Safety held up our report and said, if we just do this, it changed the way in which the Minneapolis Police Department
mhm,
began training and equipping and preparing people. That's why it's been such a shock in Minneapolis to see what the Minneapolis police, how they're being stereotyped with ICE.
mhm,
And their method is to de-escalate around the core value. Everybody goes home at night.
mhm,
Sanctity of life. And listen to those police officers within the Minneapolis Police Department that have come into that department over the last 5 years to change the culture of how they relate to people,
mhm.
black, white, whatever the color of their skin, whatever their origin, is that everybody goes home at night. You de escalate. And it's been just a shock to the system to see the use of force on the part of federal law enforcement. And that's been a difficult thing for them to deal with.
Yeah.
But the culture changed. And I think that happens when you're in the same room. you know.
I want to talk a little bit about the act of giving. So we're asking for a sacred pause. We're asking people to fast and come together and then to serve. And pet peeve of mine, I'll be really transparent, is serving and publicizing someone's worst day.
Mm.
The idea of I will give a homeless person a pair of shoes, but not before I get my 15 minutes on camera, and plaster their face all over the place. Um, what does service look like to you in this project? And how can we make sure that this project is not used to dehumanize?
Well, it goes back to where I think those core values you bring into the process.
Mhm,
If you're doing this in order to get credit or to think that you're going to get attention, I mean, I have to raise a lot of money for the projects that I'm on, and so
mhm,
telling the story of what we do
mhm.
uh, is extremely important,
Right.
so that people can feel it, taste it, and touch it,
Mhm,
but never at the exploitation of
mhm,
the individual, and always with the permission of the beneficiary community
mhm,
that we tell this story. But uh, you know, I don't. I know for me personally
mhm,
that um, I ask the question whenever I'm confronted with a tough humanitarian issue.
mhm,
And again, that comes out of the tradition of my faith.
mhm,
I want to see as Jesus sees. I
mhm,
want to hear as Jesus hears. And I want to do as Jesus would do.
mhm,
And at the end of the day, it's about doing it
mhm,
and not standing in front of a camera um, and saying, look at me, look at what I did. Uh, I want the media to know what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I want them to be exposed to the conversations that take place and the changes of heart and mind that guide this project, but not at the expense of anyone. So the serve area, it can range from acts of kindness
Mm-hmm.
to what you do in a nursing home or what you do in a hospital. We work with chaplains here in Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and getting them to think this isn't just about my paycheck;
Mm-hmm.
it's about what I bring to a crisis or a disaster, and some of those things you can't talk about. When uh, well, uh, as I said, we do a lot of work in East Africa, and during one of the famines in Kenya, we had food distribution once a month, where they received grain, some corn, some wheat, and some cooking oil. And I remember asking a group of women who were taking care of their grandchildren because their parents had died of AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, "Is this enough food?" And and they kind of looked at me, and I said, "This the World Food Program says should be enough food, and for you every month. So tell me what you do in the course of your day."
Mm-hmm.
And this woman said, "I get up in the morning and I look for work. If I find work, then I have enough money to buy food for 6 kids that are living with me.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't find work and I don't have enough food, then I go to my neighbor to see if they have food
Mm-hmm.
and if they're willing to share it." And I said, "How often does that happen?" And they said 2 or 3 times a week. We don't have enough food. I don't have work, so I can't. I have to go to my neighbor. And I said, "Well, I'm giving you food. Is that enough for you?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Does your neighbor come to you?" And they said, "When they don't have food," and they go, "Oh yeah." I said, "What do you do?" She said, "What would Jesus want me to do? I give my food away."
Mm-hmm.
And I think of those experiences of the work, the sacrifice of people globally and in our own country. We have a project in eastern Kentucky, in Turkey, and in Martin County, Kentucky, where Lyndon Johnson launched the war on poverty in 1964. We went into the hills and the hollers of eastern Kentucky talking to people that were barely making it
Mm-hmm.
because the coal industry was collapsing, jobs were going away, how they were going to make it. And I listened to their stories and what they do for each other and how they come together. Uh, Community of 15,000, we held a retreat where 400 people showed up to really come up with solutions, how
Mm-hmm.
they could collaborate and work together. That's my hope, Kimberly, is that those kinds of conversations and that will drive the change, not the TV cameras.
Amen. And that's my hope too. I can't help. First of all, I want to be part of the change. Like that is important to me. The other thing is that I can't help but hope that we find our footing. We as the collective, that we find our footing and we begin to learn how to move forward in the right way, in the ways that we need to. And in the ways, the basic premise that this country was initially built on, even though it wasn't built for everybody.
Yeah.
We need that change.
Yeah.
So how do we get started? What do we do?
People go to www.thefreedomfast.us
Mm-hmm.
and then sign up. Let us know what you want to do or can do,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll be getting information about suggestions of activities that you can do, toolkits around the various days of fasting,
Mm-hmm.
and other activities that you can do in between. We have resolutions that can be taken to the city or to the county or to to state legislatures,
Mm-hmm.
asking people to fast, similar to what they did in the colonial period or throughout American history. Periodically, in the midst of a crisis, we're called upon to pray and to fast, and how you can engage. So sign up. That's the most important thing you can do right now, and then look for ways to engage. Take some of the suggestions we offer. Let us know what you've done. And we're going to connect people. We're creating a learning community out of this process. And it's going to be a very important conversation.
Yes. I spoke before City Council today. I introduced the Freedom Fast to the Houston City Council, and it it cost me 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back, and about an hour and a half where I spoke for 3 minutes. Change doesn't have to be monumental.
Right.
Change or your contribution to change does not have to be expensive. It
Right.
is really truly about getting up and moving and doing something.
Yep.
And so if you don't do anything else, share the website,
Yep.
share this podcast. It costs you nothing to click a button.
Yeah.
We share ad nauseum memes and reels. Let's start sharing things that really will impact and make a difference. We
Yep.
all have the ability to do so. We
Yep.
all have the ability to be part of the change. We all have the ability to learn something new about someone. I learned something new about Jim in this conversation, and he and I have now been friends for a few years. So we have to continue to rehumanize our community. We have to continue to destigmatize those who are struggling in whatever area it is that they're struggling. But we have to understand that we are more alike than we are different.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't start spreading that message, then we will all be doomed. So start here, start now. I fasted 10 years ago for Lent. I used to be a huge carnivore. And because of that, I chose meat to give up during Lent 10 years ago. And I have not eaten meat again since then.
Wow. That's
So,
great.
what you do in consecration with whatever it is that you believe in, whatever is in your heart, truly can make a difference for the people around you.
Yeah.
Jim, last words?
Thank you for having me. And I am excited about where this can go. And we should do one of our events in Houston.
Absolutely.
And
I look forward to it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you. I appreciate all of the work that you've done. Um, just reading your background and how you have really contributed to change is impressive. But bigger than being impressive, it is truly heartwarming.
Mhm.
And I appreciate who you are in our community.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Catch us next time. Take
Okay. Bye.